I'm happy to welcome you to the 2025 annual meeting of the JKV Foundation. Today, we're celebrating 33 years since the foundation was established in 1992. Our motto is Neighbor Helping Neighbor, and our primary goal is a safety net for residents who have exhausted their resources. Last year, the foundation provided assistance in the amount of $150,000 to residents needing help with monthly service fees, with assisted living surcharges, and in some cases, residents were able to remain in independent living because the foundation subsidized the cost of some home health assistance. During the past year, the foundation has partnered with John Knox Village in the refurbishment of Majestic Oaks. The foundation's participation made it possible to provide upgrades to the furnishings and equipment that was selected for the patient's rooms. Some of these items include upgraded mattresses that will be coming online later this year, and beds that can be adjusted to accommodate those residents who might require a longer or a wider bed. Additional upgrades include power recliners that are easier for patients to operate and guest chairs for visitors in each room. The foundation also provides grants to a number of JKV organizations. During the past year, grants were approved for the Village Notables, the library, the Village Friends, the studio, and the photography committee. All of these activities are made possible by donations that the foundation receives from residents and family members, for which we thank you all very, very much. And now I'd like to introduce some of our board members who are with us today. John Brim is our treasurer. Mark Miser is assistant treasurer. Charlie Cron, over here, is our secretary, and Leslie Briggs is assistant secretary. The foundation board also includes 3 members from the local community and 3 members from the JKV Board of Directors. With us today is David Schaefer, community member, Greg Lafise, and Paula Kelton from the John Knox Board of Directors. Thank you all for being here. And now, John Brim will present the financial report. John?
Thank you, Linda. Okay, first I'd like to just make a comment, I guess you'd call it that, for the financial State of the Union type statement, and just say that as of currently, the financial health of the foundation is excellent. And we will go ahead and I'm going to give you a report on some things. The entire financial statement is available if you want one. We have, Candace, are you going to, oh, you have it here, okay. Each of you have been given, these are just comments that I plan to make to give you some, you might call it highlights of the foundation financial statements. We were going to present the actual financial statements here, but there was a glitch and it didn't happen. And so we're just using this summary, which is fine. The outline you can see is structured in 3 parts. One is the assets, or rather I should say the balance sheet, and then the income statement or statement of activities, which is divided into two parts. The first part is the income, and the second part is the expenses and surplus. So let's talk about the balance sheet to begin with. Of course, the balance sheet balances assets against equity. The equity of the foundation is all funds. We have, as of the end of last year, we had 16 funds in total, some of which Linda just alluded to. And then the assets balance against that. The total assets for last year were $8,167,888. Of that total, $2,051,141 was encumbered. It was there were restrictions placed on the assets, either by the donor or by the board of directors when we issue grants, as again Linda alluded to, leaving the balance, which is $6,116,000, is unrestricted. Now that is an important figure because that is our nest egg, that is our reserve, so that it tells you that we're in good health. The second part of that summary that you have and is behind me is the statement of activities, just the income part of that by source. First, I would like to say that although I was going to have the statement up here, we structure our statement of activities such that it's grouped into 4 columns. And these 4 columns, this is called 4 columns of income, expense, and net. The 4 columns are grouped together based on the restrictions. One is restricted by the board, second is restricted by the donor, the third is our endowment fund, which is donor restricted, and then the 4th column is our unrestricted general fund. That is the format of the financial statement. Some of the items that I've listed here, first of all, last year we got a $10,000 gift for new bedding to go with what Linda just reported we're participating in with John Knox on Majestic Oaks. And the second item is the Oak Tree Society. This past year, their campaign netted $6,599. The third figure here is the investment income, which was $778,592. Of that figure, more than half of it, about $400,000, is spendable income. It is interest and dividends, which of course were reinvested. The balance of it is the unrealized gain due to the market. The contributions this past year to the foundation was $6,598. Pardon me. The medical auxiliary gift shop, this past year, the sales from that were $31,559. So those of you who either donated something to the gift shop or purchased something from the gift shop, that is, you participated in that. And I will tell you in just a minute where that money went. The Spiritual Life Council also had gifts of $43,000. By far, one thing Linda I don't think mentioned is that we, in addition to handling those activities that we have sponsored, we also just respond to gifts with restrictions. And by far the 2 biggest funds that we have is the Spiritual Life Council and the Medical Auxiliary. The Medical Auxiliary is the recipient of the benefits from the gift shop. The Medical Auxiliary is structured to provide financial aid to Majestic Oaks for the residents there. And that is my selection of income to report to you. Finally, the last report gives you expenses and net surplus. As again, Linda just reported, the total for residence assistance was $150,600. The grants, which she did talk about but didn't give a total, which is $10,814 last year. The medical auxiliary gave $28,407 to the benefit of Majestic Oaks. The Spiritual Life Council spent $32,000 for operations, guest speakers and such as that. And finally, the net surplus of the foundation is $604,000. I would like to say that we're kind of a unique organization, and really the net surplus is an insignificant figure. It could be a loss. We're not a profit. We're not, of course, we're a nonprofit, but in addition to that, we are structured so that we don't need a budget and we don't need any. So all we're doing is we're fiduciaries. We are handling money just like we have our investments with a counselor, and he is a fiduciary. We are also fiduciaries for the monies that come into the foundation, and that's our job, pure and simple. It isn't to make a profit. It is to manage and handle the funds that we are being entrusted with prudently and in accordance with the wishes of the donor, if applicable, and the grants and so forth. That's it. That's my report, but I am available to answer any questions if you have any. And I can't see very well, so you'll have to let me know if you have is there someone out there with are there any hands raised? That's it then, if there are no questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for making that easy for us to follow. For some of us who are not as numbers-oriented as you are, I think it was a very good presentation. Thank you so much. Mark Miser, our Assistant Treasurer, will now present the report from the Investment Committee. Mark?
Thank you, Linda. First of all, let me say how much of an honor and privilege it is to be able to serve the foundation in any way I can. And part of that, aside from being the Assistant Treasurer, is also I'm chair of the Investment Committee. And like John said, we are fiduciaries, and part of that fiduciary responsibility is to make sure that we do due diligence on the funds that we are responsible for. The committee, the Investment Committee, meets 4 times per year to review the prior year's quarterly performance. And we make recommendations or take advice on recommendations on where we are, what we're doing, where we're going, given the fiscal and monetary environment that is constantly changing. Most of the time, the allocation changes result in nothing more than just rebalancing between stocks and bonds. We try to sell high and buy low. That's the whole idea. There are 2 separate funds. Essentially, from my perspective, there are two separate funds. The first is the endowment fund, and that fund is to be used only for financial assistance. We cannot use that for any discretionary expenses here at the village. The second fund is the unrestricted board fund, which allows us to entertain grant requests and then decide as a board whether to fund that grant or not. So we're in two parts. I would like to introduce the committee members if they're here. First of all is Greg Lafee. He's a CPA retired. You're going to hear a lot of, most people are retired here. John Brim, CPA, retired. Joanne Gerhardt was a registered investment advisor. She's also retired. She is a member at large for the committee. We have Derek Mears, who's a certified financial planner. He is with Ameriprise Financial, and he's our senior investment advisor. And also Michaela Pryor, who's also a certified financial planner and is with Ameriprise Financial. And last but hopefully not least is myself, Mark Miser. I'm a retired certified financial planner as well, so we're all retired, which is except for the advisors. We have an investment policy that we have to follow. It's part of the charter of the foundation that the investments have to follow certain guidelines, and that is something that we adhere to. Essentially, it is create and maintain an investment portfolio that in our case is moderately conservative and can generate both growth and income. And as John said, we had income, but we also had significant unrealized growth within the portfolio that still shows up on the balance sheet. But we also must comply with the Florida Prudent Investor Statute, which is to protect the foundation endowment from unreasonable allocations. It just means that we have to follow certain guidelines that a prudent person would follow to make sure that we're not making unreasonable investments. Very quickly, the financial results for 2024, our unrestricted portfolio, the larger of those two that you see on your handouts that Linda gave you, was 10.16%. And the restricted endowment portfolio, which is a little bit more conservative, actually outperformed it a little bit. It's at 10.2%. So that doesn't happen all the time, but it's nice when it does. So there's where we are in terms of the results for 2024. Toss a coin for 2025, you'll probably be right. So, all right, does anybody have any questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And now I'm pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Mr. Gary Kohler. Gary is a certified Florida Ombudsman for CCRCs, and he is also a resident of John Knox Village. So please join me in welcoming Gary Kohler. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. So I once heard a talk from Warren Buffett, and I thought, he came up to the podium and he goes, testing, 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion. Of course, nowadays that would be 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 3 trillion. Anyway, I thought that'd be an icebreaker segue from the numbers into an equally good program. So, I've just been introduced. By the way, I should say that I'm here. I lived across the street from John Brim, and John and Beverly talk to us about John Knox all the time. That's why we're here, my wife Carol and I. So thank you, John. Okay. What is a long-term care ombudsman? First of all, we've got the word ombudsman, which actually I don't like. It's hard to say. most people glaze over when I introduce myself to them. But it's a Swedish word, and it was put in place by a king a couple hundred years ago to describe, to name people that would stand up for individuals against institutions and authorities. Over the last 200 years, it's evolved to mean on behalf of the people, or the people's defender, or an advocate. So what does that mean in the US? Well, in the 1960s, nursing homes were more like the Wild Wild West. They were pretty much run out of control. The public was alerted to some problems when 32 residents at an Ohio facility died in a fire. 25 residents at a Baltimore facility died of salmonella poisoning, and that riled up a lot of people. So eventually what came out of that was the Older American Act. This act gives older people, which is us, rights well beyond the normal US citizen rights. So it's an amazing thing. And that was in 1965, and over the next 10 years, more meat got added to the program, and eventually the funding was put in place. So it's a federal program that every state has to implement. Now, every state gets to do it their own little way, although they have to follow general guidelines. So at this point, the program is now 50 years old. I'd never heard of it when my folks were in nursing homes, assisted living. I wish I had. So I'm here to tell you what it's all about. So in Florida, like I said, every state has their own little twist. In the flyer that went out, our mission statement was provided in there: to improve the quality of life for all Florida long-term care residents by advocating for and protecting their health, safety, welfare, and rights. So we're advocates for, like the Swedish king said, we're there for the little guy, if you will. It's also free. I get, when I give my spiel, a lot of people wonder how much it's going to cost them, but it's a totally free program. Now, like I said, every state implements things a little differently. In the state of Florida, we only pay the administrator and secretary on up. We don't, everybody else is a volunteer. Some states pay the ombudsman, but there are differences. So who's covered? Well, as you might guess, the nursing home residents are, and it was extended pretty early on to assisted living and adult family care. Adult family care places are like assisted living, but you're in somebody's house. Memory care units are found in nursing homes and assisted living, depending on the level of care needed. But surprisingly to a lot of ombudsmen too, it also applies to residents in independent living who are in CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities. So we are all covered by the ombudsman program. It's an amazing thing. Now, there's some differences, of course. You know, the most need is at the nursing home level, and then it kind of tapers off as we get down to the independent living. But there's still an awful lot of rights that are covered for us. So, as you might guess, Florida has a lot of long-term care facilities. It's actually not the state with the most, which I was a little surprised, but it's up in the top 3. There are 98 CCRCs. Most of them are in the South. So the way the Ombudsman program works in Florida, we're broken up into 3 regions and 12 field offices. I'm in the First Coast South district, and that's located in Daytona. We have a secretary and an administrator there, and it includes Flagler and Volusia counties. in that group, we have 158 long-term care facilities. Now, the way the program works is you go into training for 6 months to get certified. So it's classroom training, online training, and then field training, and eventually you get certified. And once you're certified, you get a nice little badge with all the laws behind it in case you need to flex some muscles in a facility. We're also assigned a number of facilities. So I was assigned 15, which actually is a bit more than normal because we're just a little thin with ombudsman in this part of the district. So I think I'm the only person I know that lives in a CCRC and has a CCRC that I'm in charge of. I'm in charge of a CCRC in DeLand. So the 15 facilities I am in charge of are all in DeLand. So I've got the list of what I do there. So I have to say at this time, I'm not the ombudsman for John Knox. So it would be a conflict of interest. And this is the way the law reads is I could go into any long-term care facility in the state of Florida 24/7, middle of the night, doesn't matter, except at John Knox. So I can't help you there. But fortunately, we've got a very good person, Kathy Barth. When she was working, she was an OR nurse. She has done a lot of legal work and actually did some long-term care administration work. She's been an ombudsman for 8 years. She's very good. And if you ever need help, getting in touch with her, first of all, there's a phone number you could always call, and you could certainly ask me to get in touch with her too. Now, the Older American Act and subsequent laws basically gave 8 categories of protection, additional rights. A right to dignified existence, a right to privacy, a right to file grievances, and so forth. I'm not going to go through these 8 because they don't tell you what that really means. I'm going to give you some anecdotal cases that I've experienced in just a bit. But right off the bat, every nursing home in the state of Florida and every assisted living and adult family care, somewhere in that facility on the wall, there's a poster that has the Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights for the nursing home, Bill of Rights for assisted living, etc. Now, we don't have that in the independent living part. What would we do? Have the poster in everybody's house? Again, it doesn't work. However, when you came to John Knox, in your packet, you were given something like this. It says, disclosure required by Florida Statute 651. And in it are the Bill of Rights for independent living. It's worth looking at. But in case you don't want to do that, I just summarized them here. This is out of the statute 651.083. So briefly, you have the right to live in a safe and decent environment, be treated with dignity and respect, all kinds of freedoms. You have the right to present grievances and recommend changes, and this includes access to the Ombudsman program and groups like FLICRA and others that advocate for residents in CCRCs. You have protection against retaliation, and you have access to the resident council. I should say that the resident council for CCRCs, for the independent living part of the CCRCs, is the primary vehicle to solve problems. Okay, so, but it isn't the only. You could certainly get the ombudsman help with a problem, and indeed, the ombudsman have been brought into some problems. I could recall with a dignity and respect issue, staff wasn't treating someone the way they should. There's an issue with environment. So, even before I was officially an ombudsman, a DeLand group, a group of people were complaining after their facility had been sold to a different management group. They didn't have air conditioning in the summer, they didn't have TV, and a bunch of other problems. And when we looked into it, we were going to advocate for them, but they were in independent living, but it wasn't a CCRC, so we couldn't help in that case. We helped the nursing home and assisted living people in that particular one, but we couldn't do that. So anyway, the resident council, I assume you know that nursing homes have resident councils and assisted living have resident councils too. So they're distinct from our resident council. So what do ombudsmen do? All right. Probably the most important thing we do is what's called the routine access visit. This is once a month, we are required to go to our facility, at least once a month, our nursing home facilities, and talk with residents. At least once a quarter to assisted living. Now, that's the minimum. We also deal with cases and such. So, here's what I do. I'll knock on somebody's door. I'll go to a facility, nursing home facility, and I'll try to visit every single person, every single resident. Now, some residents are sleeping, some residents are in physical therapy or some group activity, and you don't get to see them all. You know, in assisted living, a lot of people are out and about too, so they're still mobile and such. But what I'll do is I'll go in, I'll knock, ask to come into the room. I usually have a little folder that says Florida Ombudsman Program, and I'll point to it and I'll say, I'm Gary Kohler, I'm a Florida Ombudsman, and I'm here to make sure you're getting treated right and that your rights are being respected. And I'll get a fuzzed over look when I say ombudsman, and I'll say something like that means advocate or helper. And then if they still don't, if I've never given my spiel, I said, well, look, you have a lot of rights above and beyond the normal U.S. resident. And so we have flyers that we give out that list out all their rights, and on the back is a phone number they could call anytime and get help. So it's just a call away. So we do these routine access visits, and we get complaints. And so who can make a complaint? So the resident can make a complaint. Of course, not all residents have capacity, so that might take a POA or a guardian to make a complaint. But anybody that has an interest in the resident could file a complaint, a family member, friend. So a complaint is made about something not being done correctly. And what we do then is, with permission, we have to get consent, and we deal with these complaints anonymously and confidentially. Of course, at some point, with the nature of the complaint, confidentiality has to go by the wayside, or because you mention the problem and everybody knows who it pertains to. So, and we make sure the resident understands all that. So if we determine that there is a violation of some sort, we open up a case, and this is an official documented case with the state of Florida. You can't get at it unless you get a court order or an ombudsman, but it's there and it's filed against the facility. So we try to resolve these complaints to the satisfaction of the resident. Okay, so, and we almost always succeed. If we don't, I'll tell you what we do. Okay, but before that, we also do educational things like today, giving talks to communities, helping set up resident councils, being at retirement show and tells that help people with spreading the word about the Ombudsman program. If we can't solve a problem, and we usually solve them, but if we can't, we could always bring in the licensing agencies. So for nursing homes and assisted living facilities, that's the Agency for Healthcare Administration, ACA. So we can get them down there and, you know, they might lose their license. If it's a CCRC, independent living problem, we could bring in the Office of Insurance Regulation. So in the state of Florida, the Ombudsman program works through the two different groups. I've had to have Adult Protective Services come in and Department of Children and Families come in at times, you know, when you get sort of egregious situations. It's not unusual to bring the police in. If I go to a facility and they don't let me in, I could call the police, show them the applicable laws on the back of my thing, and they'll get me in. Okay, one thing we are not is we are not mandated reporters. It's kind of interesting. First of all, what is a mandated reporter? Those are people who have a legal duty to report suspected or known abuse of, well, for our talk, elders. So we are not that. In fact, we're the opposite. If I go into a facility and say I see a staff member violating the rights of a resident, I cannot do anything about that unless the resident gives me consent. And oftentimes that means in writing. We bring along paperwork so that there's no denying that we actually had the right to pursue the matter. So, but we are not mandated reporters. Now, if I go into a facility and I see a general problem, like there's roaches all over the walls or something, yeah, I could do something on that because it's affecting everybody. So I thought at this point, you know, the 8 general rights are, well, they're esoteric, and it's, you know, it's hard to say, well, what does this mean to me? So I thought I'd go through just a couple slides here on specific anecdotal situations I've encountered to give you a feel. And it's mostly going to be nursing home, assisted living types. I've already mentioned the couple of CCRC, independent living sort of cases I've been involved with. But, okay, so the first slide is probably the biggest of the three. I have 3 slides. Care. So, picture yourself in let's say a nursing home. You're restricted to a bed. You can't leave the bed without somebody moving you. And you have to go to the bathroom. So you hit your call light, and so somebody's going to move you. And 5 minutes goes by, 10 minutes goes by, 15 minutes goes by. You know, what happens after 2 hours goes by? And, you know, these things happen. And that's unacceptable, and we look into those cases and we get them resolved. I'll tell you, by the way, almost always it's a staffing issue or it's an issue with people on their phones, you know, not paying attention to the residents. Incontinence care, that's another common one. I run into that a lot. Somebody soils their garments and, again, call light, and you can imagine, and it's, like I said, not the only case, but I've seen cases where 4 hours, 8 hours, still not being changed and cleaned up. It happens. Accidents and falls. People fall and they're yelling and nobody comes to help them. They don't have their call light with them. And that almost always happens at night when there aren't as many people around. Care planning, when you enter a nursing home, a care plan is set up, and you have every right to be a part of that plan thing. So you may decide that you don't want what a doctor recommended. That's your right. So, but you have to be knowledgeable about what the plan is going to be. Personal hygiene. I've seen cases where somebody said, I haven't had a shower in 2 weeks, or my fingernails haven't been cut for 2 months. Activities. You know, this is your home. You're in a place, whether it's a nursing home or assisted living, And you got to be kept busy, and you keep your mind going and all that. So there should be choices and activities provided. Transportation to doctors, transportation to your bank or just the shopping. Conflict resolution, that's a good one. In a lot of places, you share a room, especially if you're on Medicaid. So I've seen places with 2 people in one room or 4 people in a room. And you can imagine if the people hate each other's guts. So I've seen the TV wars, middle of the night, they're blasting their TV at their, and it's not an easy problem to solve, because you gotta take one of them, if there's 2 people, and you gotta get them somewhere else. But that's just moving perhaps a problem somewhere else. And then there's a question of seniority, who has to be moved. So anyway, we have to wade through all that. Food issues of, I'm on the resident council here, and we see the complaints that come in, and it's probably not an unknown that most of the complaints seem to be about food or dinner, dining. So it's the same thing in nursing homes and assisted living. The food quality, the quantity, too little, too much. I did have somebody complaining I getting too much food. I look into it, and it was the person was losing weight, so they were trying to beef up the amount of food the resident was given. The temperature of the food, it's too cold, it's too hot, the timing, who you get to dine with, I mean, just about everything you can imagine. And you do have a right for special diets. You have a right to choice, you have a right to special diets if you have dietary needs. The environment, another big area. You're living in this facility. If the room is too hot or too cold, you want something done about that. Or the water tip. I went into one facility, the woman said, I don't have any cold water in my bathroom. So I went into the bathroom, and sure enough, the spigot was missing. So, okay, that was a simple one to get fixed, but the water temperature, supplies. I get a lot of complaints about supplies. There are not enough sheets, not enough towels, not enough pull-ups. A lot of times, it turns out there are adequate supplies, but they keep them under lock and key because people, if they just leave them open, people start hoarding them. And so, you get these sort of problems. Housekeeping, storage, furnishings, all those issues come into play. Staffing is a source of a lot of the problems. A lot of places will say, we just can't hire enough people or qualified people. Well, it turns out that is not a valid excuse. Once you take in a resident, you've promised them a certain level of care, and it's up to you to deliver. You can't use the excuse, I couldn't hire somebody. There's rent-a-nurse places all over the place. They're expensive, but you got to provide the appropriate level of staffing. I've seen places where they'll have the right number of people, but they're not skilled to do what they need to do. And so some of those cases, one case I had where a gentleman in assisted living had fallen in the middle of the night in the bathroom, and eventually somebody came to help, but one person couldn't deal with it alone, and they didn't have a second person, so they had to eventually call for some outside service to come and help. But you have to have not only the right number of people, but the right training too. We get a lot of complaints about dealing with Medicare, Medicaid, VA, insurance companies and such. One of my very first cases, well, back up a little bit. What happens often is somebody will be, say, at an assisted living place, they'll break a leg. So they end up in the hospital for a short period, but then they have to go into rehab. So they end up at a nursing home with rehab. And then eventually they get out of that and go back to their assisted living. Hopefully they get to go back. All right, well, in the meantime, there's somebody having to pay the bills at all these facilities, and they don't always go to the right spot at the right time. And you get people saying, facility, well, usually assisted living at the end is saying, we're not getting paid, and we got to do something about it. And so you imagine you have no friends in the area, you're wheelchair bound, and somehow you've got to work out between various facilities these billing issues. You call, and you know how that works. You know, you leave a message and nothing ever happens. So, like I said, one of my very first cases was a case like that, and it turned out the two facilities involved, the nursing home and the assisted living, were both one of my facilities, so I was able to cut through that pretty easily. Of course, that's after spending about 10 hours on the phone with Social Security and trying to figure out what's going on. Abuse, gross neglect, you can imagine the problems there. One of the times I had to get Adult Protective Services was a case with abuse. Information access. You have a right to access everything about your medical situation, your financial situation, and you get a say in all that, of course. But let's suppose you only speak Russian, but they admitted you, so they have to provide translators. Okay, so you have to have the ability to communicate and know what's going on. Underlying all these things is to be treated with dignity and respect. Now, you know, I don't know how, if somebody has to treat me with dignity and respect all the time, I pray for them, because I'm not the easiest person to get along with, ask my wife. But, you know, so you can imagine the CNAs or nursing staff or med techs having to deal with people who aren't the easiest people to deal with, but they have to deal with them with dignity and respect. And so they're earning sainthood in my book, assuming they do that, but they don't always do that. And the last slide on these sort of things, privacy. You can't have people rifling through your drawers or your mail or any of that. Had one woman, assisted living, said attendants were coming in the middle of the night. Well, it turns out they had the right to do that unless the resident had filed some piece of paper saying, I don't want people coming in the middle of the night. So we fixed that one pretty fast. They have the right to file grievances and get responses. You know, you file a grievance and then it goes into a black hole. That's unacceptable. Lots and lots of issues with billing. You know, I was double billed. I can't get access to my money. You know, just all kinds of issues there. And those are pretty easy to sort out. Personal property. A lot of times I'll hear residents will say, look, I sent my laundry off to get clean and several items didn't come back. Or I had this special blanket that my daughter-in-law gave me and it went missing, or my coat. And so things like that happen a lot. Or the cleaning person came in and dropped my Xbox or my computer and it broke. So we deal with those types of problems too. Perhaps the biggest value in my mind for the Ombudsman program is freedom from retaliation. Most people, I have to say, a lot of cases that come up that are valid cases, but the resident doesn't want to pursue it. And they don't because really they're just afraid of retaliation. Look, the Ombudsman isn't there 24/7. And so the people are afraid of retaliation. You know, the nurse will get even or the CNA will get even one way or another. And that's a valid worry. But I'm telling you, for your future cases, when you get an ombudsman involved, it puts a giant magnifying glass on you. And if there's ever any type of retaliation, it's usually pretty easy to show and then hence do something about. In fact, there are federal and state laws that come into play with retaliation. So, and the best bet is just to keep an ombudsman aware of your problems. I'm assuming that the slides will be made available. There's a URL here that you could look up and find for any facility in the state of Florida, long-term care facility, how they've done with the licensing agencies, the problems that have been encountered and what they've done. So it's kind of interesting to look it up. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions you might have. And let me leave this slide up here. Lisa Dale is the head of our district. She also does all the training, and she does ombudsman work too, of course. But we're always looking out for new volunteers, so we're always welcome. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, I got one simple question for you. How many hours a night do you sleep?
Too many. You would think it would be not many, but you know, it is a little depressing sometimes. So, any other questions? Yes,
Hold on, I'm coming. Hold on.
go ahead.
It's for
Are there special qualifications for being an ombudsman?
No. You know, I was a university professor. I mean, what do I know about long-term care? I mean, I have a degree in physiology, that a little bit, but you know. In any case, yes, if you're a nurse, you've got a better background to handle some of the issues. But we not only go through that initial training, but we have a continuous training requirement. And you eventually osmose in, you know, the things you need to know about medical problems and such. But no special requirements. Any other questions?
What about medications in a facility, such as a assisted living or nursing home? If a person requires certain medications and they don't, who gets it for the person? Do they bring it in, or how does that work? Are there conflicts that arise?
Okay, that's a good question. So the med techs are the ones that usually deliver the medicine. And they're kind of this sounds awful, but they're kind of on the lowest rung, you know, med techs and CNAs and nurses and on up. But so the way the law works, suppose you're supposed to get a medicine at noon, all right? Well, the law says you could get it 2 hours early up to 2 hours late. So you have a 4-hour window that they could administer it to you. Now, even within the legal bounds, you could have problems. So I had one case where a gentleman was given pain pills, and he needed the pain pills. He was in severe pain. So imagine it comes 2 hours late, and then the next one comes 2 hours early. You could see there would be a problem, and there was. So, or I've had cases where the wrong medicines were delivered, somebody else's medicines, cases where they ran out of the medicine that the person needed. But it's sort of about anything you could imagine going wrong has gone wrong somewhere along the line. But usually they'll deliver them. Now, if you're in assisted living, you get to decide whether you want to self-administer or have people bring it to you. Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions?
I have a two-part question. I'm sorry, I missed the name of the John Knox Ombudsman, and is that person's name listed on the portal, or how would one find out?
Are the slides going to be made available? Okay, so the slides have her name. Her name is Kathy Barth. Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. Oops. There you go.
Okay, is that widely publicized so everybody can have access to it?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
It'll be on the portal, okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
How many hours a month do you devote to this job?
You know, I'm going to answer the second question first. I just found out too late that we're supposed to, if you're doing this sort of stuff on the outside, you're supposed to report that here because it helps with our relationships with the local community. I don't know how all that works particularly, and I didn't do it. Probably last year I had about 80 or 90 hours in. But a typical month, we figure about 18 hours, because we have a monthly meeting, and then you do your visits, and cases, if you have a lot of cases come up, then you spend a lot more time. Fortunately, after a while, you keep making these visits all the time, and you get so many problems solved that the facility starts to work better. And so as many cases don't come up, and so it's sort of self-repairing in a way. The first question, I think I just answered that. Okay. Any others? Candace is getting a workout.
Thank you very much for all your information on what would be our Majestic Oaks and our Oakview Suites. Could you give an example of something specific that an ombudsperson could do for us in residence?
Okay, so as I said, the major avenue should probably be through the resident council. But if you're not getting things resolved through the resident council, you could use the ombudsman program. Of course, you could use the ombudsman program even if you ignore the resident council. The couple of cases I've seen with independent living one was environment, and it had to do with, well, I can't really go into details because it had to do with John Knox, but it was involved with the resident being unhappy with some aspect. Of course, and I should add, it wasn't about flooding. So that, indeed, I'm surprised we didn't get any problems with that. Another one was with, as I mentioned, was with being treated with dignity and respect. So if staff members aren't treating a resident with dignity and respect, that's a cause for an investigation. By the way, when we investigate things and try to find a resolution, a lot of times, say the call button issue, we look into it, and the nursing home administrators might say, look, we need to get some data. When is this happening? Which staff members are not doing their job? Who's on at work at that time? And so once you start finding out and working with the residents, and the residents standing up for themselves with an ombudsman next to them if they need it, problems get sorted out. So, okay. Any others? Okay.
Gary, I know that I speak for everyone in thanking you so much for that very informative and interesting presentation. Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. If you have not already picked up a copy of our brochure, I'd like to remind you that copies are available on the tables at both exits. I don't know if we're out of them out there or not, but if we are, you can also always contact me if you need something. We look forward to welcoming you to our next annual meeting, and in the meantime, we wish you a happy and healthy 2025. Thank you very much.